Today, we are going to look at the most horrifying pet attacks on their owners, from a tiger mauling that ended with a body half-eaten, to a lady convinced her gorilla possessed human-level empathy before being beaten to death.
It was June 2nd, 2015. The air heavy in Calhoun as string lights glowed softly over a quiet backyard gathering. Neighbors and former students mingled around folding tables laden with potato salad and sweet tea, unaware that their host, Trish Bolin, was about to lead them toward a tragedy that would unfold in seconds but haunt them forever. Trish was a 53-year-old former high school science teacher who had channeled her grief over her husband's death 6 years earlier into an obsession with primatology. Her modest ranch home had become an unofficial educational center, where she hosted library lectures and property tours centered around her prized possession, Rafi, a 400-pound male silverback gorilla she had acquired through questionable permit loopholes in 2009. Trish had convinced herself that Rafi, hand-raised from infancy, possessed human-level empathy and could be controlled through modified sign language and routine care. She dismissed the warnings of friends who noticed his increasingly aggressive behavior, the object throwing, the territorial charging, the refusal to respond to commands. These were classic signs of a mature male gorilla asserting dominance, behaviors that in the wild would establish his position within the troop hierarchy, and she was blind to it. The custom-built outbuilding where Rafi lived featured steel framing and double doors. But Trish's deadly flaw was her belief that barriers were unnecessary between her and her roommate. She routinely entered his enclosure without protective barriers, a practice that violated every USDA recommendation for primate handling. Her confidence in their bond had blinded her to the fundamental truth that gorillas, regardless of their upbringing, remain wild animals with instincts shaped by millions of years of evolution. That evening, as the cookout wound down, Trish offered her guests a tour they would never forget. 8 people followed her across the backyard to meet Rafi, who stood silently behind the mesh door, his dark eyes tracking their movement. What they witnessed next would shatter any illusions about the gentle nature of captive primates. Trish entered the enclosure carrying a crate of ripe peaches, Rafi's favorite treat. She attempted to demonstrate their communication through sign language, but Rafi remained unresponsive, a warning sign she chose to ignore. Then, in a moment of fatal overconfidence, she reached toward him to show his tactile trust. The primate took this differently. Adult male gorillas are 10 times stronger than humans, with 8-foot arm spans and the ability to lift over 4,000 pounds. Though not naturally aggressive, a single blow can shatter ribs, and their 1,300 psi bite can crush a skull instantly. In an instant, Rafi struck her across the chest with a single open-handed blow that sent her crashing to the floor. Before she could recover, he advanced, the dominant male asserting his authority. His 400-pound frame came down on her torso with crushing force, each step breaking ribs and collapsing organs. The horror escalated as Rafi grabbed Trish by the jaw, his massive hands easily encompassing her head. With one powerful bite, he removed part of her face. His canine teeth, designed to strip bark and crush tough vegetation, tearing through flesh and bone with terrifying efficiency. The guests fled in panic, their screams echoing across the suburban neighborhood as they witnessed the brutal reality of primate power. A neighbor that heard their screams dialed 911. When law enforcement arrived 12 minutes later, they found Rafi standing motionless over Trish's body. Not aggressive, but alert, displaying the calm dominance of a silverback who had successfully defended his territory. Unaware that a dangerous animal was present, they waited for another 10 minutes for animal control to arrive. Eventually, a tranquilizer dart ended the standoff, but it was far too late for Trish. Her skull was crushed, her upper torso torn open by the immense force of Rafi's attack. The scattered peaches around her body served as a grim reminder of the trust she had placed in a creature whose nature she had fundamentally misunderstood. Rafi was euthanized the following morning, a decision made without protest or petition. Trish's family declined interviews and only a small obituary appeared in the local paper, noting her background as an educator and longtime advocate for primate care. The investigation revealed multiple violations dating back years: incomplete behavior logs, improper enclosure procedures, and lack of veterinary oversight. The property was sold, the outbuilding demolished, leaving only bureaucratic footnotes to mark the end of Trish Boland's misguided dream. It was November 16, 2013, the Wyoming wind slicing across the plains near Cody, as a Barbary lion paced behind rusted bars in a half-acre of makeshift enclosures. Just past noon, Derek Pruitt stepped through the gate carrying a tray of raw venison, unaware that his years of reckless confidence were about to meet their violent end. Derek Pruitt was a 38-year-old former rodeo star whose fearless reputation on the bronc riding circuit had been built on calculated risk and split-second timing. When a career-ending injury forced his retirement, he channeled that same dangerous confidence into exotic animal ownership, converting old rodeo panels into enclosures on his property outside Cody. His centerpiece was Jax, a 500-pound Barbary lion he had acquired as a cub and raised to adulthood over 3 years. Barbary lions, extinct in the wild but still bred in captivity, are apex predators weighing up to 550 pounds, with 2-inch claws, a 650 psi bite, and hunting instincts that remain sharp even when hand-raised. As males mature, they grow more territorial, powerful, and dangerously unpredictable. Derek's approach to lion handling was built on dangerous misconceptions. His philosophy centered on dominance through calmness, believing that lions could sense human emotions and respond to confidence with submission. He regularly entered Jax's enclosure without protective barriers, hand-feeding the massive predator and walking the perimeter with nothing but a stick for protection. The warning signs had been mounting for weeks. Jax had been exhibiting classic stress behaviors, pacing at odd hours, refusing food for days, showing increased agitation during routine interactions. These behavioral changes are common in captive lions experiencing hormonal fluctuations or territorial stress, often preceding aggressive episodes. But Derek dismissed these red flags as winter laziness, his overconfidence blinding him to the danger signals that any trained animal behaviorist would have recognized immediately. On Thanksgiving weekend, his 14-year-old nephew Bryce had come by to help with feeding, as he often did. The enclosure's safety vestibule meant to protect direct contact was bypassed as always. Derek insisted Jax knew him too well to ever pose a threat. At 12:04 p.m., Derek entered the lion's pen carrying venison quarters. The lion lay still in the corner, watching. Derek called his usual greeting and turned his back to approach the feeding platform. That single act, turning away, was all it took. Without a sound, Jax rose and closed the distance in 2 strides. He struck with blinding speed, raking his forepaws across Derek's back and slamming him to the ground. Bryce screamed, frozen just outside the fence, as Jax clamped his jaws around Derek's neck and shook violently. The lion's bite, designed to crush windpipes and snap vertebrae, did exactly that. Derek kicked weakly for a few seconds, but Jax remained locked in, eyes fixed, unmoving. The animal's instincts had overtaken years of hand-rearing and familiarity. Bryce grabbed a metal rake and shouted, striking the bars. Jax didn't flinch. The 911 call came at 12:07 p.m. Bryce, voice shaking, told the dispatcher about the incident. When deputies arrived at 12:18, Jax was still hovering over Derek's mangled body. Officers fired a single shot, killing the lion instantly. Derek was pronounced dead on scene. His injuries matched a classic big cat takedown. Crushed cervical vertebrae, deep claw marks across his spine, and puncture wounds through the throat. The untouched tray of venison nearby made one thing clear: Jax hadn't attacked for food. He had responded to instinct. Territorial, sudden, and final. A small funeral was held on the outskirts of Amarillo, attended by a few family members, 2 former rodeo friends, and a wildlife officer who had known Derek from inspection visits. There were no speeches, just silence, wind, and a closed casket. Bryce received trauma counseling, Derek's remaining animals were relocated, and the enclosure was dismantled within weeks. State officials quietly tightened exotic animal ownership regulations, closing the loopholes Derek had exploited. It was May 22, 2016, light filtering through the pines above Oakhurst as guests gathered behind Mario DeLuca's cabin for cake and quiet celebration. No one noticed the massive black shape in the tree line, until Mario, spotting it with a grin, raised his phone and remarked that it would make a great photo, words that would be among his last. Mario was a 61-year-old retired chef who had traded the chaos of Modesto restaurant kitchens for what he called simple living close to nature on his wooded parcel near Yosemite. However, his dream of harmony with the wilderness had manifested in the most dangerous way possible, through his relationship with Bobo, a 400-pound black bear he had raised from a cub and allowed to roam freely around his property. Mario's approach to bear management was built on dangerous misconceptions that would prove fatal. He believed Bobo was practically vegetarian, feeding him fruit, bread, and even beer while allowing the massive predator to wander freely between his property and the surrounding wilderness. This habituation, the process by which wild animals lose their natural fear of humans, is one of the most dangerous scenarios in wildlife management. Habituated bears become unpredictable, viewing humans as sources of food rather than threats to avoid. Additionally, despite their seemingly docile reputation, black bears are incredibly powerful omnivores capable of running 30 miles per hour and climbing trees with ease. Their massive paws are equipped with claws up to 4 inches long, designed for tearing apart logs and digging through soil, but equally effective at shredding human flesh. An adult black bear possesses the strength to crush a human skull with a single swipe and can deliver a bite force of over 800 pounds per square inch, enough to crack bones like twigs. Wildlife officers have received multiple complaints about Bobo's presence near residential areas, but Mario's insistence that his bear was harmless had prevented any serious intervention. He regularly boasted to neighbors about their special bond, describing how Bobo would visit his porch and even accompany him to the mailbox. These interactions, which Mario saw as proof of their friendship, were actually warning signs of a wild animal that had lost its natural behavioral boundaries. On May 18th, Mario's birthday celebration seemed like the perfect opportunity to showcase his unique relationship with Bobo. As his 3 guests, an old co-worker, her sister, and a local handyman, enjoyed cake and conversation, the massive bear wandered into view with the casual confidence of an animal that had learned to associate humans with food rewards. Mario's decision to approach Bobo with a slice of birthday cake represented the culmination of years of dangerous conditioning. Bears are opportunistic feeders with an acute sense of smell that can detect food from miles away, and Mario's offering of sweet cake activated the same feeding response that drives bears to raid garbage cans and break into campsites. Only this time, the bear wasn't separated by a fence or fear. Bobo reared onto his hind legs before lashing out with one massive paw. The blow struck Mario across the face, sending him sprawling backward as his guests watched in frozen horror. Black bears killed through a combination of crushing bites and powerful claw strikes, using their incredible strength to overpower prey much larger than themselves. Bobo's jaws clamped down on Mario's leg, dragging him toward the tree line with the methodical efficiency of a predator, securing its kill. The bear's subsequent attacks targeted Mario's abdomen and chest, tearing through flesh and bone. The 911 call came at 4:34 p.m. from a passerby who heard the screams echoing across the ridge. By the time deputies and wildlife officers arrived 30 minutes later, Mario was already dead. his body torn apart by the animal he had considered family. A single rifle shot ended both the attack and Bobo's life, but the damage was irreversible. Mario's torso had been torn open, his neck partially severed, his face rendered unrecognizable by the bear's powerful claws. The trail of blood and clothing fragments, stretching from the party table to the forest edge, told the story of his final, desperate moments. Mario's funeral was held 3 days later at a small crematorium in Mariposa. Only close family and a few former co-workers attended. In the days that followed, wildlife authorities conducted a formal investigation and issued a public advisory on the dangers of habituating wild animals. The bear's remains were tested and buried off-site, and the county announced plans to review and strengthen local exotic and nuisance wildlife enforcement protocols. March 9, 2018, as a violent storm swept through southern Scottsville, wind rattling tin roofs and rain pooling in red clay yards. Behind a small house, a flashlight beam sliced through the dark toward a camouflage shed, where Kilo, a 350-pound Bengal tiger, waited silently as laughter from the garage faded into the storm. Within minutes, that laughter would transform into screams that would echo through the hollow. Elijah Brantley was a 29-year-old recluse whose journey from auto mechanic to exotic predator owner had been marked by increasing isolation and dangerous obsessions. Once employed at a small garage outside Bowling Green, he had slowly withdrawn from steady work after a back injury and a falling out with co-workers. Over the next 2 years, Elijah poured his time and dwindling money into a remote lifestyle, one where he could pursue what he called pure control. That mindset would take physical form in the shape of a steel-framed enclosure and a dangerous growing animal few in the area even knew existed. Elijah had constructed the enclosure in secret, a concrete-floored structure welded from scrap panels and wrapped in layers of camo tarps, brush, and plywood. Hidden behind a stand of cedars and positioned downhill from the house, it was all but invisible from the road and overlooked by local authorities. He had no exotic animal license, no fencing inspection, and no veterinary documentation for the tiger's health. The shed had no external signage, no perimeter fence, and no real emergency access. He fed Kilo raw meat, chicken quarters, ground beef, expired pork, obtained through bulk suppliers who likely never asked questions. Elijah believed that feeding the tiger regularly had earned him its trust. Sandy, Elijah's cousin, had once been close to him. She hadn't visited in over a year, but had reached out recently, concerned about his reclusive behavior and rumors from neighbors. That Friday night, she and her boyfriend Drew came to see him, under the pretense of a family check-in, though really it was part intervention, part curiosity. They sat in the garage drinking cheap beer while lightning cracked over the ridge. The metal roof shook with wind gusts and water pooled around the tires of Drew's truck. Around 9:15 p.m., after a lull in the storm, Elijah stood up with a grin and asked if they wanted to see something insane. His tone was casual and joking. Neither Sandy nor Drew realized the seriousness of what he meant. Elijah retrieved a flashlight, zipped up his jacket, and motioned for them to follow. They stepped outside into the mud and walked around the back of the house, their shoes slipping in puddles and wet leaves. The flashlight cut across trees and brush until the beam landed on a sagging tarp that covered what looked like a shed. Kilo was already awake and pacing, the sound of boots in the mud and voices in the dark alerting his predatory instincts. Bengal tigers are apex predators, solitary hunters capable of bringing down animals many times their own size. Males can weigh up to 660 pounds and measure over 10 feet from nose to tail. Their retractable claws can extend over 4 inches, and their bite force exceeds 1,000 pounds per square inch. In the wild, they ambush prey from cover, targeting the neck with a single powerful bite to sever the spinal cord and cause instant death. In captivity, those instincts remain intact, triggered by movement, scent, and opportunity. As Elijah stepped through the unlatched door of the enclosure, he crossed a line that had never truly existed in Kilo's mind. The tiger did not see a caretaker. It saw a moving shape inside its domain, presenting no visible threat. There was no warning growl, no pawing or hesitation. Kilo lunged from the side of the enclosure, his body hitting Elijah with crushing impact. Elijah landed hard on the concrete, his flashlight skittering out of reach. What happened next unfolded in seconds. Kilo's jaws locked onto Elijah's neck with devastating force, the bite crushing vertebrae and severing critical arteries. Sandy screamed. Drew grabbed a rusted crowbar from beside the shed and struck the cage bars, yelling. Kilo paid no attention. The tiger shook Elijah's body, dragging him toward the far end of the shed, where blood quickly pooled under his hind legs. Kilo began feeding, methodically, silently. He tore through fabric and flesh, exposing muscle and ribs. Sandy, panicked, ran back toward the house to get her phone, slipping twice in the mud. Drew remained outside the shed, shouting Elijah's name, unable to look away. Elijah was unresponsive within the first 30 seconds. He was likely dead within a minute. Sandy's 911 call was logged at 9:27 p.m. It took over 20 minutes for law enforcement and wildlife officials to reach the property, slowed by weather and poor road conditions. When officers arrived, Kilo was still crouched over Elijah's remains, showing signs of possession and guarding behavior, ears back, eyes fixed, tail rigid. One wildlife officer prepared a tranquilizer dart, while another took position behind the patrol vehicle. A single dart was fired and struck Kilo in the hindquarter. The tiger growled, backed away slowly, and collapsed under sedation within 3 minutes. The scene that investigators entered was gruesome. Elijah's face was torn beyond recognition. His neck was broken, and his chest cavity had been partially opened. Blood had seeped into the cracks on the concrete floor. Clothing, bone fragments, and shredded meat were scattered in a 6-foot radius. Elijah's funeral was held 5 days later at a private cemetery near Bowling Green. Only a small group of family attended. No obituary was published, and no formal service was conducted. His casket remained closed. The family declined interviews and asked that the details remain private. The tiger Kilo was transferred under sedation to a secure holding facility that night. After a brief observation period, he was relocated to a licensed big cat sanctuary in the western United States. Authorities opened an investigation into how Elijah had acquired and kept the animal, but found no records, receipts, or permits. Without clear violations involving commerce or transportation, no charges were filed posthumously. The shed was dismantled within a week. The land was quietly listed for sale by Elijah's estate. There was no local press coverage beyond an initial police blotter entry. State officials issued a public advisory about exotic animal ownership, but stopped short of passing new restrictions. It was March 6, 2018, and late summer heat lingered in Pretoria as 15 guests gathered at Francois du Toit's property for a barbecue. The 42-year-old wildlife volunteer had built his identity around dangerous animals, a passion that began in childhood during safari expeditions across Kruger National Park. Francois thrived on admiration and attention. Friends described him as charismatic but reckless, someone who constantly pushed boundaries to impress others. What started as conservation work had transformed into something darker, a need to prove his dominance over nature's most feared predators. 2 decades of working with rejected animals had given Francois dangerous confidence. He believed he possessed some mystical connection with the wild creatures, often telling visitors that animals could sense his pure intentions. This delusion had been reinforced by years of successful interactions, creating a feedback loop that would prove fatal. His pride and joy was Napoleon, a magnificent male lion he'd raised by hand after the cub was rejected by its mother. The custom-built enclosure dominated his property's eastern section, measuring 60 by 40 feet with steel fencing over 12 feet high. Inside, Napoleon paced with fluid grace, his golden mane rippling as 420 pounds of pure predatory muscle moved with deceptive calm. African lions represent nature's most efficient killing machines. They can sprint up to 35 miles per hour, leap more than 12 feet horizontally, and generate bite forces exceeding 650 pounds per square inch. Even captive-raised lions retain fundamental predatory instincts that no amount of human contact can eliminate. As twilight painted the sky, Francois retrieved a bucket of fresh raw meat from his shed. His guests formed a semicircle around the fence, pulling out smartphones in anticipation of another feeding demonstration. The wine consumed during dinner had made Francois more boastful than usual. He stepped into the buffer area, then unlocked the inner gate, entering Napoleon's territory directly. The attack was sudden and devastating. Napoleon launched himself forward with explosive power, both front paws striking Francois simultaneously in the chest and shoulders. Before he could process what was happening, Napoleon's massive jaws clamped around his neck with surgical precision, the 4-inch canine teeth penetrating deep into soft tissue. The sound of crushing vertebrae was audible to horrified guests. Francois' cervical spine snapped like dry kindling under immense pressure. Blood erupted from puncture wounds, spraying across the dirt in arterial spurts. Napoleon's predatory instincts took complete control as he shifted his grip to Francois' left trap muscle and upper chest. The lion's powerful neck muscles contracted as he began the characteristic head-shaking motion that big cats use to tear flesh from bone. Deep lacerations opened across the shoulder and collarbone, exposing white bone beneath mangled tissue. Guests erupted into screams while someone frantically dialed emergency services. Napoleon repositioned over Francois' prone arm, his massive weight pinning the torso to the ground. The lion's jaws found purchase around the lower jaw and left side of the face, the crushing bite force pulverizing bone and cartilage. With a violent upward jerk, Napoleon tore away tissue from neck to cheekbone. Gripping the body by the torso, Napoleon began dragging his victim toward the far corner, away from screaming witnesses. Once reaching his preferred feeding spot, Napoleon settled down and began feeding methodically. Police arrived with sirens wailing as Napoleon lay contentedly beside Francois' partially consumed remains, blood matting his golden mane. A veterinarian from Johannesburg Zoo arrived with a tranquilizer rifle, but only after Napoleon collapsed unconscious could emergency personnel recover what remained of Francois de Troyes. It was November 18, 2014, and thick strands of oak and maple trees bordered the Kemp residence in Knott County, Ohio. The remote farmhouse sat on 6 acres surrounded by rolling hills, the perfect setting for Valerie Kemp's dangerous obsession with proving that apex predators could be loving companions. Valerie was driven by desperate need for validation and attention. At 42, she'd spent most of her adult life feeling invisible and unremarkable. Her marriage ended in bitter divorce. Her children rarely visited, and she struggled with profound loneliness. The exotic animal community had become her refuge, a place where she could reinvent herself as an expert. Her transformation from lonely divorcee to self-proclaimed big cat expert had been gradual but complete. She'd spent hours researching tiger behavior, joined online forums, and gradually convinced herself that she possessed special insights into feline psychology. What started as genuine fascination had evolved into dangerous delusion. Valerie had built a passionate community of viewers who tuned in regularly to watch her interact with Shiva, a magnificent Bengal tiger she'd raised from a 6-week-old cub. The tiger had been her constant companion for 5 years, living inside the house like an oversized domestic cat. She genuinely believed their bond transcended the natural order. That evening, Valerie had invited 2 special guests to witness Shiva's grooming routine. Dr. Marcus Webb, a local veterinarian who had repeatedly warned her about the dangers, and Jennifer Martinez, her closest friend, who had grown increasingly concerned about Valerie's reckless behavior. Shiva was an absolutely magnificent specimen, measuring nearly 10 feet from nose to tail tip and weighing just over 500 pounds. His coat displayed the classic Bengal pattern, brilliant orange with bold black stripes. His massive head featured piercing amber eyes and 4-inch canine teeth. Bengal tigers represent the apex of feline evolution. Native to the Indian subcontinent, they're the largest wildcats in the world, with males regularly exceeding 600 pounds. Their bite force exceeds 1,000 pounds per square inch. At exactly 7:30 p.m., Valerie positioned herself beside Shiva, who was lying on his side in a relaxed state. She held the professional grooming brush, speaking to her online audience about how gentle and loving Shiva really was. For nearly 12 minutes, the session proceeded without incident, with Shiva remaining calm and cooperative. At 7:42 p.m., Valerie turned her back briefly to adjust the laptop's camera angle. She reached across the coffee table, her attention focused on the screen for perhaps 3 seconds. In that instant, something fundamental shifted in Shiva's demeanor, a switch that flipped from domesticated companion to apex predator. Without warning, the tiger's predatory nature asserted itself with terrifying swiftness. Shiva rose to his feet with fluid grace, his massive frame uncoiling like a spring. The attack was sudden and devastating as the tiger lunged forward, clamping his jaws around Valerie's left thigh, his 4-inch canines penetrating deep into muscle tissue. The force of the bite was so powerful that her femur cracked audibly under pressure. Valerie's scream filled the room as Shiva's grip tightened, his jaw muscles contracting with hydraulic force. Dr. Webb shouted in alarm, reaching for a push broom while Jennifer backed toward the front door. Shiva then began the characteristic head-shaking motion, thrashing his massive head from side to side, tearing through muscle, tendons, and blood vessels. The tiger's weight dragged Valerie down onto the carpet, her back striking the floor with a sickening thud. Shiva repositioned himself over her prone form, his amber eyes displaying the cold focus of a predator in full hunting mode. The tiger's next bite targeted Valerie's torso, clamping down below the ribcage. Crushing force compressed internal organs while canine teeth punctured through skin and muscle into the abdominal cavity. Blood began pooling beneath her body, soaking into the carpet and spreading outward in an ever-widening crimson stain. Dr. Webb finally connected with emergency services, screaming into the phone for immediate assistance. By the time the first police officers burst through the front door, exactly 9 minutes after the initial 911 call, Valerie's body had stopped moving entirely. Shiva stood over his victim, blood dripping from his muzzle onto the carpet below. Officers drew their weapons, while the tiger's amber eyes fixed on the new arrivals with predatory interest. Sergeant Rodriguez made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his career, raising his weapon and firing 3 shots in rapid succession. It was September 3rd, 2017, and humid Florida air hung thick over the suburban neighborhood of Lakeland, where Spanish moss draped from ancient oak trees like funeral shrouds. The afternoon sun blazed mercilessly, pushing temperatures into the mid-90s. Rick Mendez was addicted to attention and validation in the digital age. At 39, he built his entire identity around his social media presence, particularly on TikTok and Instagram, where videos featuring Princess regularly garnered hundreds of thousands of views. What had started as genuine fascination with reptiles had morphed into something more dangerous, a relentless pursuit of viral content. The backyard pool party was meant to be the ultimate content creation opportunity. his nephew Miguel's 8th birthday combined with a live demonstration that would surely break his previous view records. Ricky had been planning this moment for weeks. Princess was an impressive specimen, measuring just over 7 feet from snout to tail and weighing approximately 180 pounds. Her dark armored hide bore scars from early life in the wild before Ricky had acquired her through questionable channels 5 years earlier. The modified above-ground pool dominated the far corner of the property, originally intended for swimming but drained and converted into a habitat for Princess. The pool walls had been reinforced with concrete blocks, and a custom filtration system maintained water quality in what Ricky proudly called his backyard Everglades. American alligators represent one of nature's most successful predators, virtually unchanged by evolution for over 200 million years. They're perfectly adapted for life as ambush hunters in aquatic environments, capable of remaining motionless for hours, then exploding into action with lightning speed. The birthday party was in full swing by 4 p.m. with approximately 15 guests ranging from young children to elderly grandparents. Adults clustered around patio tables with cold beers, while children ran around the yard, their laughter mixing with sounds of Latin music that would soon be replaced by screams. At exactly 4:12 p.m., Ricky stepped over the pool's edge into the shallow water, his bare feet finding purchase on the concrete bottom. Princess lay motionless on her basking platform with only her eyes and nostrils visible above the waterline, appearing almost statue-like in her stillness, a deception that would prove fatal. What happened next defied all of Ricky's previous experience with Princess. Without any warning signs, Princess exploded into motion with terrifying speed that had made her species apex predators for millions of years. Her massive jaws opened to reveal rows of canonical teeth, and she lunged forward, clamping down on Ricky's left forearm with crushing force that shattered the radius and ulna instantly. The sound of breaking bones was clearly audible above the sudden screams of party guests. Ricky's confident smile vanished, replaced by an expression of shock and disbelief as Princess's jaws locked around his arm like a biological vice. With Ricky's arm still trapped in her jaws, Princess immediately began the death roll that is the signature killing technique of all crocodilians. She began spinning rapidly in the water, her powerful tail providing the torque necessary to generate tremendous rotational force that created devastating stress on joints and bones. Ricky's screams of agony filled the backyard as Princess continued her deadly rotation. His left arm, still locked in her jaws, began to separate from his shoulder as tendons, muscle, and ligaments were stretched beyond their breaking point. Blood clouded the pool water, creating a crimson swirl that followed the alligator's movements. Party guests reacted with a mixture of horror and paralysis. Children screamed and ran toward the house while adults stood frozen in shock. Carmen Mendez, Ricky's sister, began screaming his name while frantically dialing 911 with trembling fingers. Princess completed her first death roll and surfaced briefly, Ricky's mangled arm still clamped in her jaws. The force of rotation had torn his shoulder from its socket, and his left arm now hung at an impossible angle, connected to his torso by only a few remaining strands of muscle and skin. But Princess wasn't finished. Repositioning her grip, she released Ricky's destroyed arm, only to clamp down on his midsection with even greater force. Her teeth penetrated through his ribs and into internal organs, while the second death roll proved even more devastating than the first, spinning with mechanical precision that pulverized bone and tissue. Emergency services arrived to find a scene that defied training and experience. Captain James Morrison, a 20-year veteran, had dealt with various animal attacks, but nothing had prepared him for the blood-filled pool, floating body parts, and massive alligators still circling her victim with predatory satisfaction. Dr. Sarah Chen, the county's wildlife veterinarian, made the difficult decision to use lethal force rather than risk additional casualties. The rifle shot that ended Princess's life echoed across the suburban neighborhood, finally allowing rescue personnel to enter the pool and recover what remained of Ricky Mendez. It was July 4th, 2015, and the backyard of Bobby Ray Jenkins' Florida home buzzed with the sounds of a traditional Independence Day celebration. The sprawling property in rural Polk County featured a large deck, multiple grills smoking with barbecue, and a custom-built concrete pool that housed the most unusual party guest of all, Chomper, a 400-pound American alligator that Bobby Ray had been keeping illegally for over 8 years. 15 family members had gathered for the annual celebration, including children who had grown up watching their grandfather's dangerous relationship with the massive reptile. At 52, Bobby Ray was a retired auto mechanic who had spent his working years fixing engines and his retirement years collecting increasingly dangerous pets. His fascination with alligators had started when he found Chomper as a baby in a drainage ditch near his property. What began as a temporary rescue had evolved into an obsession, with Bobby Ray building an elaborate habitat and feeding system for the growing predator. He had ignored multiple warnings from Florida Fish and Wildlife officials. Bobby Ray's relationship with Chomper had become the stuff of local legend. He regularly hand-fed the massive alligator during family gatherings, treating the apex predator like an oversized pet dog. His grandchildren had grown up watching these feeding demonstrations, and Bobby Ray took pride in his ability to interact safely with one of nature's most dangerous predators. American alligators are apex predators that have remained virtually unchanged for over 200 million years. Perfectly adapted for their role as ambush hunters in aquatic environments. Adult males can reach lengths of 14 feet and weights exceeding 1,000 pounds, with jaw muscles capable of exerting over 3,000 pounds of pressure per square inch. Their bite force is among the strongest in the animal kingdom, capable of crushing turtle shells and breaking the bones of larger mammals. Alligators are opportunistic feeders, driven entirely by instinct, and they view any movement near their territory as either a threat to be eliminated or prey to be consumed. That afternoon, Bobby Ray had been drinking beer and entertaining his family with stories of his adventures with Chomper. The alligator was floating motionlessly in his concrete pool, appearing docile and harmless in the Florida heat. As the barbecue progressed, several family members requested the traditional feeding demonstration that had become a highlight of their gatherings. Bobby Ray was happy to oblige, retrieving a whole chicken from his outdoor refrigerator. The 15 family members gathered around the pool's edge, with children sitting on their parents' shoulders to get a better view of the spectacle. Bobby Ray approached the pool's edge with the whole chicken dangling from his hand, calling out to Chomper in the playful tone he had used for years. As Bobby Ray leaned forward to drop the chicken into Chomper's waiting jaws, he lost his balance and fell partially into the pool. The moment his arm hit the water, Chomper's predatory instincts took over completely. The massive alligator's jaw snapped shut on Bobby Ray's extended arm with bone-crushing force, his 3,000 pounds of bite pressure instantly fracturing bones and severing major arteries. Chomper immediately began his signature death roll, spinning rapidly in the water while maintaining his grip on Bobby Ray's arm. The violent rotation dislocated Bobby Ray's shoulder and pulled him fully into the pool, where the alligator's natural advantages became overwhelming. The family members screamed in horror as they watched Bobby Ray being dragged underwater, his blood turning the pool water crimson. The death roll continued for nearly a minute, each rotation causing additional trauma to Bobby Ray's arm and torso, while simultaneously disorienting him and filling his lungs with water. Chomper's powerful tail thrashed violently, striking Bobby Ray's body with enough force to crack ribs and cause internal bleeding. The alligator's grip never loosened, his teeth designed specifically for holding on to struggling prey. Bobby Ray's desperate attempts to break free only triggered Chomper's instincts to bite down harder and roll more aggressively. The massive alligator dragged his victim to the deeper end of the pool, where Bobby Ray's struggles grew weaker as blood loss and drowning combined to overwhelm his system. Within minutes, Bobby Ray's movement ceased, as the massive alligator's death roll proved unsurvivable. Chomper dragged Bobby Ray's lifeless body underwater, his instincts driving him to secure his kill in the depths of the pool. The traumatized family members, including young children, were forced to witness the entire gruesome spectacle. Emergency responders arrived within 18 minutes, but Chomper remained highly agitated and dangerous in the pool. It took wildlife officers over 90 minutes to safely tranquilize the massive alligator and recover what remained of Bobby Ray's body. The investigation revealed that Bobby Ray had been keeping the alligator illegally for years, ignoring multiple warnings from wildlife officials. Chomper was euthanized the following day, and Bobby Ray's death prompted stricter enforcement of exotic animal regulations in Florida. The traumatized family members required extensive counseling, and several of the children who witnessed the attack developed lasting psychological trauma. It was October 8, 2017, and the cozy suburban home of retired teacher Margaret Foster in Stamford, Connecticut, was set for an elegant dinner party. The dining room table was perfectly arranged with fine china and crystal glasses, while the aroma of roast beef and fresh bread filled the air. 6 close friends had gathered for what had become a monthly tradition, but there was one additional guest who made these gatherings unique: Bruno, a 180-pound male chimpanzee who had been Margaret's constant companion for 12 years. At 61, Margaret was a former elementary school teacher who had dedicated her life to caring for others. First her students and then Bruno, whom she had acquired from a defunct research facility when he was just an infant. She had raised him like her own child, allowing him to sleep in her own bed, eat at the dinner table, and interact freely with visitors. Margaret refused to acknowledge that Bruno had become increasingly aggressive and unpredictable as he reached full maturity, dismissing his occasional outbursts as normal behavior for an intelligent animal. Margaret's friends had grown accustomed to Bruno's presence at their dinner parties, though several had expressed private concerns about his size and strength. Bruno had been displaying more territorial behavior recently, becoming possessive of Margaret and showing signs of aggression towards strangers. But Margaret insisted that Bruno was harmless, and that their bond transcended any natural instincts he might possess. Chimpanzees are among the strongest primates on Earth, with adult males possessing the strength of 5 grown men. They have powerful jaws filled with sharp teeth, long arms with incredible reach, and hands capable of gripping with crushing force. Despite their intelligence and capacity for learning, chimpanzees remain wild animals with unpredictable temperaments. Adult males can become extremely territorial and aggressive, especially when they perceive threats to their social hierarchy or living space. Their attacks are swift, brutal, and often fatal, as they instinctively target the face, hands, and genitals of their victims. That evening, Margaret had allowed Bruno to join the dinner party as usual, seating him in his customary chair at the head of the table. The conversation was lively and the wine was flowing freely when one of the guests accidentally knocked over a crystal wine glass. The loud crash and sudden movement triggered something primal in Bruno's brain, and his demeanor changed instantly from calm to agitated. Instead of removing Bruno from the situation, Margaret tried to calm him down by approaching him directly and speaking in soothing tones. This was exactly the wrong response, as Bruno interpreted her approach as either submission or a challenge to his dominance. The massive chimpanzee's eyes narrowed, and he began making aggressive vocalizations that should have warned everyone to evacuate immediately. Bruno's attack was swift and savage. He launched himself at Margaret with explosive force, his powerful arms wrapping around her torso as his teeth found her face and hands. The 180-pound primate's strength was overwhelming, and Margaret had no chance to defend herself against an animal that possessed 5 times her physical power. Bruno's teeth tore into Margaret's face and scalp, ripping away chunks of flesh, while his powerful hands gripped her arms and shoulders. The chimpanzee's attack was methodical and brutal, targeting the areas that would cause maximum damage and disable his victim most effectively. Margaret's screams filled the dining room as Bruno continued his assault, his natural instinct driving him to eliminate what he perceived as a threat. The dinner guests watched in absolute horror as Bruno bit off several of Margaret's fingers, the bones crunching audibly between its powerful jaws. The chimpanzee's hands, each capable of crushing bones, struck Margaret's face and torso repeatedly, while his teeth continued to tear at her hands and genitals. Blood splattered across the elegant dining room as Bruno's savage attack continued. Margaret's struggles grew weaker as massive blood loss and trauma overwhelmed her system. Bruno showed no signs of stopping his assault, driven by instincts that have been suppressed but never eliminated by years of domestication. The horrified guests were too terrified to intervene, knowing that approaching the enraged chimpanzee would likely result in additional casualties. Within minutes, Margaret's movement ceased as Bruno's brutal attack proved fatal. The massive chimpanzee continued to maul her lifeless body, his aggression showing no signs of diminishing. The traumatized dinner guests had called 911, and police officers arrived quickly to assess the immediate threat. When officers entered the home, they immediately shot Bruno to stop his continued assault on Margaret's body. The investigation revealed that Margaret had been keeping the chimpanzee illegally, as Connecticut had banned private ownership of primates years earlier. Her death prompted renewed calls for stricter exotic animal regulations and better enforcement of existing laws. The traumatized dinner guests required extensive psychological counseling, and several developed lasting PTSD from witnessing the brutal attack. Margaret's death became a cautionary tale about the dangers of keeping wild animals as pets, regardless of how long they have been in captivity. It was August 19, 2014, and the rustic cabin of logger Frank Morrison, nestled in the Montana wilderness, was alive with the sounds of a weekend barbecue. The property, surrounded by dense forests and mountain peaks, hosted 4 neighbor families who had gathered to enjoy Frank's famous grilled steaks and his most unusual attraction, Buster, a 350-pound male black bear that Frank had been illegally feeding for over 3 years. The afternoon sun filtered through the pine trees as children played on the wooden deck while adults gathered around picnic tables laden with food and beer. At 44, Frank was a third-generation logger who had spent his entire life in the Montana wilderness, developing what he believed was a special understanding of wild animals. His relationship with Buster had started innocently enough when the bear was just a yearling, drawn to Frank's property by the smell of cooking food. What began as occasional food scraps had evolved into daily feedings, and Frank had convinced himself that he had tamed one of nature's most powerful predators. Frank's neighbors had initially been fascinated by his relationship with the massive bear, but several had grown concerned as Buster became increasingly bold and aggressive around food. The bear had been displaying more territorial behavior as winter approached, his natural instincts driving him to consume as many calories as possible before hibernation. Black bears are North America's most common bear species, with adult males weighing between 300 and 400 pounds. Despite their name, they can be brown, cinnamon, or even blonde in color, and they possess incredible strength capable of breaking down doors and overturning cars. Black bears are omnivores with powerful jaws and razor-sharp claws designed for digging and climbing, but they can become extremely dangerous when defending food sources or feeling threatened. Their bite force exceeds 800 pounds per square inch, and their speed and agility make escape nearly impossible once an attack begins. That afternoon, Frank had been drinking heavily and entertaining his guests with stories of his adventures with Buster. The massive bear was pacing near the tree line, drawn by the smell of grilling meat and clearly agitated by the presence of so many people near his established feeding area. As the barbecue progressed, several neighbors requested a demonstration of Frank's special relationship with the bear. Frank retrieved a plate of raw steaks from the grill, announcing to his guests that he would hand-feed Buster directly to show how docile and trustworthy the bear had become. The four families gathered at a safe distance, with children perched on their parents' shoulders to get a better view. The attack came when Frank moved too slowly with the food, hesitating for dramatic effect while his guests watched. Buster's patience, already strained by hunger and the stress of multiple humans in his territory, finally snapped. The 350-pound bear charged Frank with explosive speed, covering the distance between them in seconds. Buster's massive paw struck Frank in the chest with bone-crushing force, sending him sprawling backward onto the wooden deck. The plate of steak scattered across the ground as Frank tried desperately to scramble away. But Buster was already on top of him. The bear's powerful jaws clamped down on Frank's shoulder, his teeth puncturing through muscle and bone while his claws raked across Frank's torso. The horrified neighbors and their children watched as Buster began mauling Frank with savage intensity. The bear's claws, each over 2 inches long, opened deep gashes across Frank's chest and arms, severing arteries and causing massive blood loss. Frank's screams echoed across the property as Buster's assault continued, driven by a combination of food aggression and territorial instincts. Buster's powerful jaws worked methodically, crushing bones and tearing flesh as he viewed Frank not as a friend, but as a competition for the scattered food. The bear's bite force shattered Frank's ribs and punctured vital organs, while his claws continued to rake across his victim's body. Frank's struggles grew weaker as blood loss and trauma overwhelmed his body. Within minutes, Frank's movement ceased as the massive bear's attack proved fatal. Unlike predatory attacks, Buster showed no interest in consuming Frank's body, instead leaving the lifeless form and moving toward the scattered steaks on the deck. Emergency responders arrived within 25 minutes, but Buster had already retreated into the forest after consuming the meat. Wildlife officials were forced to track and shoot the bear the following day when he returned to the property, as his aggressive behavior around humans made him too dangerous to relocate. The investigation revealed that Frank had been illegally feeding Buster for years, creating a dangerous situation that wildlife officials had warned against repeatedly. Frank's death prompted stricter enforcement of wildlife feeding regulations in Montana, and several of the families who witnessed the attack required extensive psychological counseling. It was June 25, 2013, and the backyard of construction contractor Carlos Mendez's suburban Florida home was transformed into a tropical paradise for his annual pool party. The spacious property featured a kidney-shaped swimming pool surrounded by palm trees and tiki torches, while 12 guests enjoyed barbecue and cocktails in the warm evening air. But the real attraction wasn't the food or drinks. It was Serpentina, a 200-pound Burmese python that Carlos regularly brought to social gatherings as his ultimate conversation starter. At 38, Carlos had built a successful construction business through hard work and an appetite for attention that extended to his choice of pets. He had owned Serpentina for 6 years, treating the massive snake like a living accessory that never failed to impress friends and clients. Carlos regularly draped the 16-foot python around his shoulders at parties, believing that his bond with the apex predator demonstrated his fearlessness and made him unforgettable to potential business contacts. Carlos's relationship with Serpentina had become legendary among his social circle. He often brought the massive snake to pool parties and barbecues, allowing guests to touch her scales and pose for photos. Carlos took pride in his ability to handle one of the world's largest constrictors, dismissing concerns from friends who worried about the snake's size and strength. Burmese pythons are among the world's largest snakes, capable of reaching lengths over 20 feet and weights exceeding 250 pounds. They're powerful constrictors that kill their prey by wrapping their muscular bodies around victims and squeezing with tremendous force, up to 90 pounds of pressure per square inch. These snakes are ambush predators with excellent swimming abilities, and they can remain submerged for up to 20 minutes while hunting. When stressed or threatened, Burmese pythons become extremely dangerous, using their incredible strength to defend themselves against any perceived threat. That evening, Carlos had been drinking and entertaining his guests with stories of his adventures with Serpentina. As the party progressed, several guests requested a demonstration of his famous snake handling skills. Carlos decided to take the spectacle to the next level by bringing Serpentina into the pool, planning to swim with the massive python while his impressed guests watched from the deck. The 12 party guests gathered around the pool's edge, phones ready to capture what they expected to be an impressive but harmless display. Carlos entered the shallow end of the pool carrying Serpentina, her massive body draped across his shoulders and arms. The snake appeared calm initially, but the combination of water, noise, and unfamiliar environment began to stress her beyond her tolerance level. Serpentina's constriction response was swift and methodical. Feeling threatened and disoriented by the water and crowd, the 200-pound python began wrapping her powerful coils around Carlos's torso and neck. What started as normal positioning quickly became a deadly embrace, as Serpentina's stress-triggered constricting instincts took over completely. Carlos's initial laughter turned to concern, then panic, as Serpentina's coils tightened around his chest and throat. The massive snake's body worked with mechanical precision, each loop finding purchase around Carlos's ribcage and neck, while her incredible strength began compressing his vital organs. Carlos tried to unwrap the snake's coils, but 200 pounds of muscle was far beyond his ability to control. The horrified party guests watched as Carlos's face began turning red, then blue, as Serpentina's coils cut off his air supply. The python's grip tightened with each breath Carlos tried to take, her muscles responding to his struggles with increased pressure. Carlos's desperate attempts to reach the pool's edge were hampered by the snake's weight and the water's resistance. Several guests jumped into the pool to help, grabbing at Serpentina's coils and trying to unwrap them from Carlos's body. But the python's grip was far too strong for multiple people to overcome, and their efforts only seemed to make her constrict harder. Carlos's struggles grew weaker as oxygen deprivation and the crushing pressure overwhelmed his system. Serpentina's coils worked methodically around Carlos's chest and neck, compressing his ribcage and cutting off blood flow to his brain. The massive snake's body formed tight loops that functioned like a living vice, applying pressure that no human body could withstand. Carlos's movements became increasingly feeble as the python's deadly embrace continued. The traumatized party guests could only watch helplessly as Carlos slowly suffocated in the shallow end of his own pool. His face turned purple as Serpentina's coils compressed his throat and chest, making breathing impossible. Within minutes, Carlos's movement ceased as the massive python's constrictions proved fatal. Emergency responders arrived within 10 minutes, and paramedics immediately began working to free Carlos from the python's grip. Law enforcement officers killed the snake on the spot, and within minutes they had cut through the coils to remove Carlos's body. Despite immediate CPR attempts, Carlos was pronounced dead at the scene. The investigation revealed that Carlos had been keeping Serpentina without proper permits, violating Florida's exotic animal regulations. His death prompted renewed calls for stricter enforcement of python ownership laws and better education about the dangers of keeping large constrictors as pets. The traumatized party guests required extensive psychological counseling, and several developed lasting PTSD from witnessing Carlos's slow death in the pool. His death became a cautionary tale about the dangers of treating wild animals as party entertainment, regardless of how long they have been in captivity. It was a warm, calm evening in the rolling hills of Ohio, where a man named Sam Mazzola made his living from exotic animals. Sam's property, surrounded by dense woods, was home to various wild creatures: bears, tigers, wolves, all living in enclosures or roaming the grounds. To many, Sam was a controversial figure, revered by some for his expertise and loathed by others for his apparent disregard for animal welfare. Born and raised in Ohio, Sam's passion for animals began early. As a child, he developed an interest in collecting and caring for creatures, a hobby that gradually grew into a full-fledged obsession. Over time, Sam's fascination with exotic wildlife led him to accumulate a variety of dangerous animals. Sam's collection included lions, tigers, and bears, dangerous creatures that, despite their raw power, he believed could be tamed and cared for. He often exhibited them at fairs and public events, offering people a chance to get close to the animals. Sam justified his actions by claiming he was educating the public about conservation, but the truth was more complex. He faced numerous allegations of animal cruelty and neglect. The United States Department of Agriculture had cited him multiple times for violating the Animal Welfare Act, including failing to provide adequate veterinary care and proper living conditions. His license was revoked in 2009, and a fine of $21,000 was imposed for the violations. Yet Sam was allowed to continue housing his animals. Despite the controversies, Sam pressed on with his exhibitions. His most famous animal was Bart, a 500-pound black bear. Sam had raised Bart from a cub, and their bond was well known in the community. The bear would stand on its hind legs when Sam approached, eager for the routine feeding. The two seemed inseparable, and Sam often told visitors how much he trusted Bart, despite the whispers of danger surrounding such a powerful creature. But bonds like these can be fragile, especially when outsiders become involved. Brett Condra, a 24-year-old Ohioan, had long been fascinated by animals. His childhood was spent exploring creeks and rivers in northeastern Ohio, discovering fishing sports and learning to respect the wildlife around him. He would often spend his weekends camping and catching bullfrogs with blades of grass, always surrounded by nature. His family supported his love for animals, and by his 20s, Brent sought work that allowed him to stay close to his passion. When Sam offered him a job on his property, Brent ignored his father's warnings about Sam's business practices and the risks of working with wild animals. The opportunity felt like a dream come true, one he couldn't bring himself to resist. On August 19, 2010, Brent was preparing for the evening feeding when tragedy struck. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the property. With a bucket of raw meat in hand, Brent approached Bart's 15-foot by 20-foot enclosure. Over the years, Brent had grown confident in handling the animals, particularly Bart, who seemed to recognize him and had always been docile in his presence. As usual, the bear stood up on its hind legs, eagerly awaiting its meal. In the early days, Brent had been nervous around Bart, but over time he believed he had earned the bear's trust. He approached with calm and steady movements, respecting the animal's wild nature. Slowly, he unlocked the door to the enclosure and let Bart out. Feeding Bart outside his cage had become a routine, one the bear had grown accustomed to. Brent, confident in their bond, never imagined how quickly trust could shatter. Without warning, Bart lunged at Brent, grabbing him with powerful claws and slamming him to the ground. The 500-pound bear, normally calm, had transformed into a savage force. Brent had no time to react. Bart's claws raked across his body and its teeth sank into his face, tearing through flesh and bone. Brent struggled to break free, but the bear was too strong. Its claws shredded his chest and arms, while its powerful jaws crushed his hand and shattered his ribs. Blood pooled around him as Bart continued the brutal attack. Sam, who had been preparing other animals for the night, heard the commotion and rushed to the scene. He shouted at Bart, trying to distract the bear long enough to stop the attack. With a fire extinguisher in hand, Sam managed to force Bart back into the cage. But the damage was done. Brent lay bleeding on the ground, his body torn apart by the bear's assault. Sam immediately called 911 and Brent was rushed to Metro Health Medical Center. Despite all efforts, Brent died from his injuries shortly after 1:30 a.m. on August 20th, 2010. The coroner's report confirmed that Brent's cause of death was blunt and sharp force trauma consistent with a bear attack. Sam, in a brief interview, spoke carefully about the incident, declining to provide details but mentioning that Brent had been Bart's favorite caretaker. He added that while he respected Brent's family's wishes, he believed Brent would not have wanted Bart euthanized. However, Brent's father and ex-wife insisted on the bear's euthanasia, and a veterinarian carried it out. The tragedy didn't end with Brent's death. In 2011, Sam Mazzola was found lifeless in his home, an eerie scene that only deepened the mystery surrounding his life. Sam's body was discovered handcuffed, face down on his waterbed, wearing a leather mask. The autopsy revealed asphyxiation with a bedroom toy lodged in his throat. The circumstances of his death remain unsolved, adding to the strange and unsettling nature of his legacy. It was a hot, oppressive morning on the 10th of January 2019 when DC, a 44-year-old wildlife research scientist, arrived at the CV Yoshiki laboratory in Indonesia. The sun rose over the sprawling Pearl Farm, casting long shadows over the murky swamps where a collection of crocodiles basked lazily in the heat. The laboratory, situated within the farm, was home to a group of illegally kept crocodiles that spent their days sunbathing by the water. Among them was Mary, a 17-foot, 1,300-pound creature with a reputation that preceded her. Known for her ferocity and cunning, Mary had become a spectacle, her incredible size and strength drawing awe from those who observed her. DC had long been fascinated by the ancient reptiles, and as an animal lover, feeding them was a ritual she enjoyed. Her routine was predictable. She would arrive early, the first employee at the lab, bringing fresh cuts of meat for the crocodiles. Mary was always the first she fed, her powerful body often propelling herself out of the water to snatch the meat from mid-air with lightning speed. The crocodile was a marvel to DC, a testament to nature's raw power and efficiency. It was a graceful yet dangerous dance between them, the ritual repeated with reverence on both sides. That morning, DC approached the enclosure with a bucket of meat, her attention drawn to the crocodile's fluid movements, a constant reminder of its predatory nature. The sun cast a golden glow on Mary's scaly hide as it locked its beady eyes on the offering. DC carefully raised a chunk of meat over the 8-foot-tall wall. She had done this countless times, always careful, always mindful of the danger. But that day, in her awe, she let her guard down. With a sudden flick of its powerful tail, Mary surged upward, leaping toward the meat. DC's hand, which was too low, was within reach. The crocodile's teeth, razor-sharp and deadly, sank into her flesh with terrifying precision. DC screamed, the pain immediate and blinding. Mary, with blistering speed, yanked her over the wall and into the enclosure. The ground beneath DC cracked as she collided with the concrete floor. Pain exploded through her body, but before she could even react, Mary twisted her body with frightening precision, performing the death roll. DC's body was wrenched and tossed like a rag doll, bones cracking, blood spilling across the floor. Her screams were swallowed by the sound of crushing bone and tearing flesh. Mary's cold eyes never left her, unblinking and unyielding. DC's strength faded, her cries becoming weaker as the crocodile continued its brutal assault. Her left arm, the first to be torn away, disappeared down the creature's throat, swallowed whole. The crushing, twisting agony of the attack overwhelmed DC's senses. She was now bleeding profusely, struggling to stay conscious. As her body was lifted and slammed again, she realized she had no chance of escape. With a surge of desperation, she scrambled to her feet, searching for anything to help her flee. Her remaining arm was barely functional, but she pushed herself toward the enclosure wall, hoping for a crack or ledge to grip onto. The wall was smooth, the surface offering nothing. The momentary hope faded as her strength drained away. Without warning, DC slipped. She fell into the murky waters below, now fully immersed in Mary's domain. The water churned with blood as the crocodile moved in. Mary's movements were swift and deliberate as she entered the water. DC flailed her remaining arm, desperate to paddle toward safety. But the water was not her ally. This was Mary's world, and the crocodile was a master of it. With terrifying speed, Mary closed the distance, clamping her jaws around DC's torso. The crunch of her ribs breaking echoed through the water, and DC's screams rang out, a futile cry for help. The blood in the water was unmistakable. DC fought, her body convulsing as the crocodile dragged her deeper. Mary's grip tightened and the water began to fill DC's lungs. She could feel her life slipping away, the weight of the creature pulling her down, her vision blurring. Her mind screamed for air, for salvation, but there was none. The murky depths became her tomb. Horrified, the staff stood frozen as the crocodile emerged from the water, the mangled remains of their colleague still held tightly in her jaws. The terror was palpable as they watched the creature drag the lifeless body onto the concrete floor, leaving a trail of blood behind. DC's left hand had been severed and her torso was barely recognizable. Panic set in as the staff hesitated to enter the enclosure. They called the authorities, Tomboriri police and officials from the North Sulawesi Natural Resources Conservation Agency. The rescue team arrived, but when they approached the crocodile, Mary reacted violently, thrashing her tail and hissing in warning. She was not ready to give up her kill. With caution, the team sedated Mary and transported her to a wildlife rescue facility, where it was confirmed she had consumed DC's body. Staff at the CV Yoshiki laboratory described DC as a quiet lady who loved animals. They were deeply devastated by the death of the head of the lab. However, they noted with concern how Mary had shown prior signs of aggression, having previously attacked and killed another crocodile that had ventured into her pool. The farm's owner, a Japanese national, was arrested for illegally keeping crocodiles and sentenced to 10 years for his reckless disregard that led to DC's death. It was a quiet evening in Hampshire, England, where Brandon had spent countless hours immersed in his passion for reptiles. His bedroom, tucked away in a corner of the house, was a sanctuary, a space where snakes and tarantulas lived in harmony, all under his expert care. He was a herpetologist, not just a casual enthusiast, and his collection of 10 snakes and 12 tarantulas was more than just a hobby, it was his life's work. From a young age, Brandon had been captivated by the fascinating world of reptiles. At 10, he was hooked on nature documentaries, mesmerized by the slithering movements of snakes and the silent predatory grace of tarantulas. By 15, he was holding his first snake in his hands, and from that point his collection and knowledge only grew. Among all of Brandon's animals, one stood out above the rest. Tiny, a 7.9-foot-long African rock python. She was an impressive creature, destined to grow even larger, with the potential to reach lengths of 13 feet or more. Tiny had been with him for years, and what began as a small, manageable pet had transformed into a massive, muscle-bound serpent, coiling with strength and power. Tiny was usually kept in a secure enclosure, a large reinforced glass tank designed to house her safely. However, Brandon often allowed her out to roam freely during feeding times or when he spent time handling her. Despite her size and strength, he treated Tiny like family, caring for her with the same devotion as he did for his other reptiles. In his eyes, Tiny was more than a pet, she was a companion, an integral part of his world. But as Tiny grew, so did the risks. A python's constriction isn't an act of aggression, it's a calculated move for survival, an instinct honed over millennia. Pythons only squeeze when they're preparing to strike, when they're ready to feed. But with Tiny's increasing size and strength, Brandon knew that handling her required more caution. No longer could he drape her casually around his shoulders or let her explore freely as he had when she was smaller. The risks of handling an 8-foot python were simply too great. Yet Brandon's love for the snake often clouded his judgment. On the day everything went wrong, he allowed Tiny to roam freely in his room, underestimating the danger in doing so. August 25, 2017 began like any other day. Brandon, a landscaper by trade, returned home after work eager to relax. He lived with his parents who were downstairs at the time. Brandon's usual routine was to head upstairs to change before returning downstairs to spend time with his reptiles. But this evening, something was different. Just after heading up to his bedroom, a sudden ominous thud echoed through the house. There was no cry of pain, no shout for help, just silence. Brandon's father, hearing the noise from the living room, grew concerned and went to investigate. When he opened the door to Brandon's room, the sight that greeted him was nothing short of horrifying. There, on the floor, was Brandon motionless, his body sprawled out on the floor in a way that was entirely unnatural. Tiny was nowhere to be found. Panic gripped his heart as he called for Brandon's mother to dial emergency services. They rushed upstairs, but their attempts to revive Brandon were futile. He remained unresponsive. 8 long minutes passed before the paramedics arrived, but it was too late. The 31-year-old man, once so full of life and enthusiasm for his reptiles, was dead. Tiny, for her part, had slithered off into a corner of the room, seemingly content, her behavior eerily calm in contrast to the chaos unfolding around her. The investigation into Brandon's death was swift, but the cause of his demise was unclear. The coroner's report indicated asphyxiation, but there were no marks on his body to suggest a violent struggle. There were no bruises or bite marks, nothing to indicate that Tiny had attacked him in the way many would expect from a predatory animal. Snake expert Professor Scott Boback offered a different perspective. According to him, constriction alone wasn't the most likely cause of death in this case. Instead, he suggested that Tiny's grip might have caused a sudden restriction of blood flow to Brandon's brain, triggering a cardiac arrest. The massive pressure from the python's coiling could have caused Brandon to lose consciousness in mere seconds, and without immediate intervention, his heart would have stopped, leading to his tragic death. Further examination of the scene revealed something curious. Despite the absence of bite marks or signs of a struggle, the experts couldn't shake the feeling that something had gone wrong, something beyond just a simple accident. Veterinarian John Cooper, who had joined the investigation, took a closer look at Tiny's recently shed skin. There were no signs that Brandon had fought for his life, no frantic claw marks or scratches. Tiny's skin was intact and there were no indications of struggle. This was an unsettling discovery, raising more questions than answers. Despite all the evidence pointing toward an accidental death, there remained a lingering suspicion that Tiny had somehow been responsible. Could it be that the python had been acting out of affection for her owner? Snakes, after all, aren't known for the same kind of attachment that a dog or a cat might display. Their interactions with humans are often driven by instinct, whether it's for warmth, security, or simply the comfort of being close to their handler. In Tiny's case, it was possible that the snake had wrapped herself around Brandon not out of aggression, but because she had felt a need for closeness. The gripping power of the python, combined with Brandon's inability to escape, might have turned into something deadly, even if it was never the snake's intention. Adding to the mystery was the discovery of a faint rib fracture on Brandon's body, likely caused by the python's powerful coils. This too suggested that Tiny's grip had been too much, that the strength of her coils had overwhelmed Brandon's body in a way that he couldn't escape. Months after the tragedy, Brandon's parents faced a difficult decision. Despite their grief, they couldn't bring themselves to put down the python. Tiny had been an integral part of their son's life, and they didn't see her as a vicious animal. However, her growing size and the weight of the tragedy led them to rehome her. Tiny was sent to the National Center for Reptile Welfare at Hadlow College in Tunbridge, Kent. It was a cold, crisp evening in the Penrose neighborhood of St. Louis, Missouri, the sun long gone and the city beginning to settle into the quiet of the night. Dennis Moore, a retired landscaper in his 60s, had just kissed his wife Melvina goodbye. She was off to her night shift at the nursing home, and he was preparing for his usual walk through the neighborhood. For years, this routine had been a constant in his life, a time for reflection and a break from the duties of the day. Dennis, in his simple jacket and cap, locked the door behind him and set out down the street. The world seemed to slow as he walked, the gentle breeze rustling the leaves and the muted sounds of the city blending into the background. It was during these walks that he found a kind of peace, a break from the chaos of the world, if only for a little while. The Penrose neighborhood, a tight-knit community, had always been a peaceful place. Neighbors knew one another by name and help was always just a knock away. Dennis and Melvina had made their home here for years, and their lives had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Dennis, always the Good Samaritan, tended to the lawns and gardens of his neighbors, helping the elderly and offering a friendly smile to everyone he met. It was a life of quiet satisfaction, one built on love and community. But as Dennis walked those familiar streets that evening, something was different. Unbeknownst to him, the streets of Penrose had become the hunting ground of a pack of dogs, wild and aggressive. Pit bulls, known for their strength and tenacity, had been roaming freely through the neighborhood for days, causing fear and unease among the residents. They had become a dangerous presence, unafraid of people, territorial, and relentless in their pursuit of prey. Over the past several days, neighbors had noticed the dogs jumping fences, barking loudly, and roaming in packs of 6, moving in tight formations like a wolf pack, driven by hunger and aggression. Dennis was nearing the end of his walk, just 2 blocks from his home, when the danger that had been lurking in the shadows finally found its target. His phone was dying and he planned to text Melvina once he arrived home. But as he rounded the corner and approached his block, the sudden sound of growling broke the stillness of the night. From the darkness of the alleyway, a pack of pit bulls emerged, their eyes gleaming with ferocity. They surrounded Dennis, their bodies tense, teeth bared, and growls filling the air. He attempted to back away, but the dogs were too fast, too powerful. They closed in on him, and before he could react, they lunged. The attack was swift and brutal. Dennis, despite his strength, had no chance against the sheer power of the attack. The dogs tore into him, their massive jaws sinking into his flesh, dragging him to the ground. The force of the attack was overwhelming. One of the pit bulls bit into his leg while another latched onto his arm, pulling him toward the pack's center. His cries for help were swallowed by the night as the dogs consumed him alive, the pack's primal hunger unstoppable. As the hours passed, the neighborhood remained unaware of the tragedy unfolding just a few blocks away. It wasn't until a neighbor taking out the trash stumbled upon the gruesome scene that the authorities were alerted. A call was made and the police arrived quickly, finding Dennis's body already decaying from the vicious attack. The dogs had torn him apart, leaving nothing but the remnants of what had once been a man who had loved his family and his community. Melvina at work that night had grown increasingly worried when Dennis didn't call at his usual time. She tried reaching him several times, but her calls went unanswered. By 5 a.m., she knew something was terribly wrong. When the police finally rang, she picked up only to hear a voice she didn't recognize. The officer on the other end asked if she was Dennis Moore's wife. Her heart sank as she nodded, but the officer refused to explain over the phone. When she arrived home later that morning, her worst fears were confirmed. She was shown only her husband's head, the rest of his body too damaged to be seen. The trauma was unimaginable and the shock left her numb. The community, which had always felt like a safe haven, was now marred by the brutal death of a beloved resident. Dennis Moore, the kind-hearted man who had always been there for others, was gone, taken by the very animals that had been allowed to roam unchecked. The investigation into the attack revealed that the dogs responsible for the savage assault were part of a larger pack. 3 of the dogs had been captured, but the police believed there were still 3 more at large. Residents of the neighborhood, already shaken by the attack, grew increasingly fearful. The dogs, known for their territorial behavior, had been seen frequently around the area, showing aggression toward anyone they encountered. They were wild, untrained, and without the necessary discipline to live safely within a human community. In total, the 6 dogs were reported to have been roaming across an area of about 500 square blocks, causing havoc as they moved through yards, alleyways, and streets. For months before the attack, neighbors had reported the pit bulls to animal control, but their warnings had gone unheeded. It wasn't until Dennis's death that authorities took action, but by then it was too late. The damage had been done, and the neighborhood would never be the same. The presence of the remaining 3 dogs, still unaccounted for, kept the residents on edge, afraid to walk the streets they once called home. Melvina, consumed by grief, suspected the dogs had been neglected or intentionally trained to be aggressive, perhaps fed raw meat to fuel their savage behavior. Without knowing the owner, the true cause of the attack remained a mystery. While pit bulls are often unfairly stigmatized, their aggression is usually the result of mistreatment. In this case, negligence had turned them into predators, roaming unchecked and becoming a deadly force in the Penrose neighborhood. Dennis Moore's tragic death underscored the dangers of failing to properly care for animals. It left a lasting mark on the community and raised an unsettling question. Are certain breeds, like pit bulls, simply too risky as household pets?
Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now